I'm Gina Barreca. I have a new book out called Gina's School because it's shameless that how much I need to give advice to people, how much I have learned in my 68 years, 38 of them as a professor at the University of Connecticut, and where the former student who did the artwork for the book, Don Gibet, is able to illustrate all the important things that everybody needs to know about life. You can use it as an advice book, a coloring book, something to start conversations every day, which is what we need to have. I have had the most wonderful conversation with Matthew Gray of 50 Tastes of Gray, right? I got that right, 50 Tastes of Gray. We talked about everything from whether God is male or female to what makes a good plate of mashed potatoes to what really counts as love and how love changes over time to what are the ideas that matter most and bring us closest together. So I hope this will be just my first time on this program. I hope to come back for lots more conversation.
Wow. Gina, welcome to 50 Tastes of Gray. How you doing?
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much for the beautiful invitation.
Fantastic. Now, Gina, I want you to take me to school today. Are you up to it?
Absolutely. I have school right in front of me with some pages marked. I'm always ready because I've been teaching for 38 years at the University of Connecticut. It's a book of advice, and it's a book of what I've learned that I realize that I've passed along to individual classes, but it's almost impossible for me at this point not to give advice.
One of the things when I was growing up, I always received from my mother and sister was what I called unsolicited advice. But I become that person now. So I can totally dig what you're saying. And I have to say, I love your book.
Oh, thank you.
It's just so much fun. It is nothing like a challenge when people say, oh, you have to read this book. Your book is light and delicious and rewarding to look at. And the illustrations are fantastic as well. So I definitely want to recommend this book.
Well, thank you so much. It's an entirely different kind of book than I've ever done before. I've never worked with somebody in this much of a collaborative way. But we did it back and forth without ever meeting.
Oh, wow.
And so the artist, John Gannett, and I, for Gina School, John had been a student of mine. And I've been certainly writing these pieces of wisdom or observations about the world down for years, but it wasn't until I saw John's art in the little notebook he was carrying. And they were a cross between cartoons, like New Yorker cartoons. And I thought, okay, that's what this book needs. It needs to enter another dimension. Obviously, you are somebody who is enthralled by art. Look at your background. You've got everything there. You understand how the visual adds a whole other structure to language, to sound, and to the word. And so when John and I decided we could do this together, he's a young man of 27. I'm an old lady of 68. We had to bridge generations, backgrounds, cultures, knowledge systems, the way of dealing with the world. And we managed to do it. It was really fun to collaborate with somebody who came from an entirely different universe than my own. That was one of the delights I hadn't expected.
Do you write the words first and then ask him to match up the illustrations, or is it look at his illustrations and then write to bells?
That's a great question. I did the language first. So I've been writing these little shibboleths, these observations down for years. When I realized that John was going to illustrate them and the pages would look a certain way, I made them shorter. I made them sharper, and so that he was able to come up with images. So to give you an example of how people who are viewing can see, so that this is lesson 56. And this is an optimistic one. So 56 is your favorite song might be one you haven't heard yet. Here's something. And John, in a wonderful use of anachronism, puts in a cassette tape. And I think that was after, I don't know if he's ever handled a cassette tape. He's 27, right?
Right. He doesn't know from cassettes of 8 tracks, God forbid.
That's right. Now everybody loves vinyl again. But I don't think cassette tapes are necessarily making a big comeback. But I think that I had explained to him in a conversation over coffee that I've been trying to recreate playlists that were like my favorite cassette tapes. And he said that a lot of these are reminders for myself. These are things I need to remind myself on a regular basis. It's another beautiful lyrical illustration. This is one that I really have to remind myself of all the time, is you cannot count on the praise of others to keep you going, ever. You will almost never get it. And when you do get it, you won't get enough of it. And when you do get it, it won't be the right kind. And also, it probably won't be the right person saying, or it won't be about the right thing. It doesn't work that way. That was one that I go back to often, and so that there are those. And then there are other ones that are very much directed on heartbreak or loss or failure or having to make do when things aren't perfect. And you do it anyway. And because you know you're going to have a good time, even if things are not ideal. So I love that we were talking before we started recording about the long history of radio. And I used to, when I had no idea what was going on, I had just moved back to New York from England in the early 80s and did a show on, I don't know where you were in the early 80s, but on WBAI. Do you remember Pacifica Broadcasting?
I do, yes.
Yeah. And I have always loved radio. It's always been a passion of mine. And I love that it's become this entirely other, like the book being an illustrated book, that radio is in podcasts are now sort of illustrated radio.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I think you get to see people's expressions, not just imagine them. You get to see the situations. You get to see everything in context. How was it for you to be in radio?
I've been a ringer, like I said, since the earth was cooling, all the way going back to the 80s. There was a lot of business of life between my old radio days and now my current podcast days, but it felt like it was a very natural to mention next step type thing.
How did you design your background? And just thinking of the illustration nature of it.
Yeah. My wife Lynn did the painting that you see over one shoulder with the wine and the cheese. And because she knows my style, what I like. And the little eat that you see there, the little plate, that's my old license plate for my Hawaii boot tourist days. That's a real license plate. And I never thought that would be available going back to 2004 when I started Hawaii boot tours. It eventually was crushed by the COVID shit show in 2020. But when I went into the DMV, I asked for, license plate. I asked for food. And they said, sorry, not available. And I asked for all these various type of things. And nothing I wanted was available. Then I started walking away and I said, oh, by the way, what about eat? And the lady typed it in. She goes, it's available. I said, I'll take it. And so that kind of stayed with me. And so that's what you're seeing over there. I dig the art. I dig the music. I dig the food. I love people so much. So that's a big part of who I am. And I think you are too.
It really comes through in the work that I looked up and what you're doing. And so it is the idea of putting all of these elements of life together, right? And not being afraid to do that, not being afraid of like, how does this go? If I could come up with a menu for Gina's food, that would be great. The one for that's here with the grapevine is once it's 31, once we hit 40, women have only about 4 taste buds left. One for vodka, one for wine, one for teas, and one for chocolate. And there's another one about how, often we think that what we really need to be happy is this ineffable, this pursuit of what life can offer us. But really what it takes for us to be happy is a martini and a plate of cheese sticks. Yeah, that it's really, sometimes it's easier than you think that the journey can be.
I was looking through the book. I noticed there were several references to love and relationships. Is that something that's been huge in your world? And what's it like now for you?
It's been interesting. Yes. One of the early trade books that I did, popular books, was called Perfect Husbands and Other Fairy Tales. And I wrote it at the end of my first marriage. And I really wanted to look at the concept of why should a woman who has a room of her own, who has a job of her own, who has a life of her own, who has friends and rich existence, why should she want a husband? Because I discovered that I wanted a partner. I wanted a spouse. I was lonely in my first marriage, and I didn't want to be lonely. And that seemed unsustainable. And I wrote about Perfect Husbands. I actually fell in love with the man that I've been married to for 35 years now. And so it's like in a happy relationship, in a satisfactory relationship, it's not like you're going through all the rules all the time. You look for the calmness, you look for the satisfaction, and you're not tempted by the chaos of other things. You build the security of a relationship, the benefits of a good partnership. So that was, that was an interesting sort of recognition. And so this book that began when I left my first marriage was waking up with the concepts of romance. It ends with my wedding to my and so a very different idea of what love and romance. And now as somebody who is again 68, Mike is 8, and so it's realizing that love changes certainly as you age, but it endures. And I'm not somebody who necessarily believes that you have to marry your best friend. You could end up being best friends with the person that you marry, but you could go out to dinner with your best friend. You could go to the movies with your best friends. I think you want to choose if you're going to be in a monogamous relationship with a life partner. You want to choose somebody you want to come home after being out in it, rather than somebody that you just have fun with. I mean, because I hope for most people that we have a lot of people in their lives want all kinds of relationships to flourish. But if it's going to be the singular kind of relationship that you want with a partner, you have to like the way they eat. You have to like how they smell. You have to, I mean, it's all those things that I think would become increasingly annoying over decades if you didn't like it in the first place.
That's very well put. Do you think that younger people have the same kind of notion about love? Do you think that they understand what it is, or is it something that really requires years and years of time and practice?
First loves, one of the Gina School lessons is that first loves are adorable and late loves are magnificent. But there's a difference between adorable and magnificent. I mean, the great thing about teaching, one of the biggest about teaching is that they're all in there, or most. I mean, I get auditors who come back to take lessons for free over 62. So I get folks who are coming back for non-degree attendance for taking the classes. And so that's always interesting. So most of them are between 18 and 25. Graduate students at the undergraduates. It's like seeing Labrador puppies or something when they fall in love. You see them going through something for the first time, and you see them realizing that love doesn't necessarily have to last for the first time. It's all brand new to them. They're still in the wrapping. It's like a toy. They're still in the box. They're still under warranty. But then for them to grow into their paws, like a Labrador, them to figure out that, these books that they've been reading since high school, I mean, we give them books that are they're a reach, that they're not going to realize what's going on in those books until they're 35 or 45, 60. So it's great to have them, come to an intellectual understanding of something, but not realize what it means until later. And for me, it's always gratifying to be able to stay in touch with people who graduated. I have students now who are retiring. I'm not retired. They are retired.
Right.
But so what I am concerned about, but I understand this is not my time. This is not my generation. Their tide is coming in. Mine is, I hope that it's slowly going out. I worry about the students who form, or the young people who form very intimate relationships with people they have not met in person. Because like I said, how somebody eats a sandwich, how they sip their coffee, all those things in cold water songs, the way you hold your knife, the way that's your tea. I mean, it's like, it makes it different. I mean, if I'm not a fan of slurpers, and so if somebody is slurping, I can have great conversations with them about books, but I'm not having breakfast with them every day.
I could never marry a slurper.
And I don't think most people know they're slurpers. And so it's like they're not going to put it in their profile. It's not something you're going to text about. It's like you're not going to say to somebody, well, one of the things you have to know about me, if somebody is, I just had wrist surgery. So it's like I look like I have stigmata. I don't. I just had carpal tunnel and the rest of it. But if somebody like, okay, I have a scarred hand, like something you should know about me is I have scars on my hand. That would be something you could admit to something. But I'm not a meat eater. All of my clothing is washable. I have very few items I have to take that are dry clean only, because I tend not to be graceful with some dishes. I'm eating, I don't know.
Oh, is it like a high velocity kind of feeding for you? It's like things come shooting out at high
Yeah,
speed?
anything like with a lot of milk, olive oil, like some really nice clam dish, something with fresh pasta and garlic and olive oil. I gotta come home with some of that olive oil. So I need like a print, like I'm wearing. Like if I could wear a tarp, I will wear a tarp, but they're not usually approved in the finer dining establishments.
How about a
And
dainty little bib or something?
I really know I'm gonna go up to that. Actually, a friend of mine from high school said we should because I got the lanyards for my glasses.
Right.
And at that stage, but she said we should come up with because she's also not the most graceful women.
You're onto something here, Gina. You brought up food a couple of times so far in this conversation. That's usually my thing. So
Oh,
I'm gonna have to ask you, how do you order your steak?
how do as the chef would have. What I always say, as the chef, and if they insist on my saying something, then it's medium rare. I don't want it bleeding, but I want it hot and I want it ready. So
Okay.
that's it. And if I really like the place, I will get mashed potato as my second.
And why is that a caveat as to if you
Because
really have a place?
because I have to trust the kitchen because bad mashed potatoes are basically grouting. I mean, you just, right? You use them in the shower to seal things. I mean, the stuff that's glued, if they don't really keep it fresh and light, and if it doesn't have the air that it needs. So,
You know what the secret is to great mashed potatoes or the bad mashed potatoes? Well, bad ones, the great ones that you refer to are overmixed. And the good ones, the ones that are light and airy, are doing ricer. And so they're much nicer, right?
yeah, no, it's absolutely right. And that's the difference because that's not what I would do at home. I'm a good cook, but that is what, of course, that's what should be done.
I could definitely come over there and cook you and Michael some fantastic mashed potatoes.
See, and so for mashed potatoes for me are a delicacy.
Right.
Because I'll do nice Yukon potatoes. I make perfectly reasonable potatoes.
You know, when you throw the word reasonable into your cooking, it doesn't sound so good.
Right. It's not so again, it's like a bad marriage. It's like
Uh-huh.
it's fine, if it's not disastrous, it could be fine. Well, why bother? So I'd rather
Okay.
save going out to eat or going to somebody's house who will put their potatoes through a ricer because they not only have the understanding that that's the secret to it, but they have the patience and the skill and the artistry that I lack. Where I'll make. I I'm a pretty good cook, and I have people over. We have people over a lot, but I have like standard things done. So and most of those I will make as if I am eating whoever is going into battle, right? So I will make 3 lasagnas so that one of the Gina School lessons that I really like, several of them have to do with food. But number 13 is for Italians. For Italians, cooking is more choreography than color. I mean, in the kitchen, everybody was like dancing around everything. I mean, again, you were feeding the immediate family of 117 every Sunday when everybody got back from church. And it was party food. We made a lot of, and I'll do my lasagnas, but I'll be back to them in a time. And they freeze well. I make the pasta differently for the ones that I'm going to serve that weekend versus for the ones that are going into the freezer. And I make a really nice salmon with scallops, which of course are now becoming a cryptocurrency, right? You get nice scallops. It's,
Oh, God.
but so there are the things that I make that I know I can count on. But what I really admire are again the people who have the ability, and I know with one of them who will do the fine small plates that are not cooking for the troops, or I'm cooking for the troops. And listen, again, one of my favorites, the wishbone here. It's a lesson 20. I live for scraps. I want the bits, the burnt parts, the crispiest pieces, the gravy and the bones. When Bruce Springsteen sings that spare parts and broken hearts keep the world turning, he's right. Leftovers are not only the best part of Thanksgiving. For many of us, leftovers are the best parts of life. So I'm there in the kitchen taking the burnt fat off the lamb I mean, I'm going for the bone in the. I make a nice leg. I make an okay leg. I make the brown roast, and I'm there getting the, you know, and I don't care if it's everybody that sits at the table of people I loved. So I will take their last. Like, you're gonna finish that is a big phrase at a house. You're not gonna finish that. I'll have it. So everybody goes around. So there are people who want the asparagus. There are people who want the roast potatoes. I make a plain roast potato because I'm not ricing it. I mean, so we'll pass around everything. I got friends who are vegans. I've had to learn how to do this, but I do not make the vegan cheese. I tried that once. And have you made vegan cheese?
Why?
Because they're well,
That's crazy.
But I tried to make it with a good friend. So she said, I'll show you how to make it. Added the cashews in the mixer and the whole thing. And it made her happy. But now I buy vegan cheese. There's some places that I can go buy them. But people who can come up with the little slices and the beautiful assembly of a dish. I don't so much assemble.
You've been talking about food now for a few minutes. I have to announce you. What have you eaten today?
Oh, today, let's see, actually, I got up rather later than usual, but I did make, I like making breakfast. So we had omelets with, it was Gouda, little tiny tomatoes, fresh parsley, which I always have, scallions, made with the butter, and then toast. But that's all I had. And we're going to have leftover chicken bolognese tonight because I really do like the leftovers. Make that over the weekend. And so that'll be a treat. We live in Storrs, Connecticut, which is where the University of Connecticut is. And there are not really good restaurants within 45 minutes. And so I have learned.
Right. No, that totally makes sense. Then you have to settle a long-standing dispute. Gina, you're a real Italian person. Do you call it sauce or do you call it gravy?
Gravy. Red gravy. It's red gravy. I'm making gravy this weekend. I'm making gravy. So that's yeah. I mean, but sauce works. I mean, I know it is. So I will say I'm making red sauce. Now, what do you say? I'll say I'm making red sauce, but I'll say I'm making a meat gravy.
I guess the difference, the delineation is that sauce is without meat and gravy is with meat.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. I used to make it like twice a week. And now we're trying to eat healthier and do all the rest of it. So I make it once.
What part of not making it or not having it as often is healthy?
I think just not having the pasta as often. I can't have pasta without having salt. I know other people can, and I use less salt than I used to, more garlic and the oregano.
My approach to really, really healthy spaghetti and meatballs is spaghetti meatballs without the spaghetti.
What do you use? What's the
meatball and a spoon?
Meatballs.
Or eat shirataki noodles, which have no carbs.
Right,
and
right.
That's the way to go. If you're looking to reduce calories to be healthier.
I think it's probably easier for me, or somehow more acceptable, but just psychologically, emotionally more acceptable to me to have it fewer times a week than to change the way I eat it. But I will keep that. I will keep it in mind. Now,
that's a very moderate stance. I like that. That's very diplomatic. You could be a politician.
Yeah, I don't think that for more than 5 minutes. I mean, I'm Sicilian, where some Italians would not consider that actually Italian. The northern Italians don't think of the Sicilians as Italians. And so I came from a real, at least a very poor background. Like, my grandparents came to Ellis Island, and so they were with 9 kids. They were just eating, again, what filled bellies and, made everybody. And so that's a hard tradition to break when that was the meal you looked forward to. And of course, only the men, the women bought everything and prepared almost everything, except if there was a nice cut of meat, right? So if you got pork, if you got, nice cut of veal, you did that. That was then the men you're allowed to do. Otherwise, the women did everything.
Not only have I loved and been enjoying Gina's school, I've also been reading a little bit about you and your background. So I want to let you know that I have an Uncle Bill also. Yep. This is my mom's friend.
Same Uncle Bill?
It's not the same as yours, but I know that you had one.
Yeah. There's a type. There's Uncle Billy was a type. Uncle Bill's motto was never give anybody your real name. And And he didn't have kids himself. Him and my Aunt Ree, my Aunt Virginia, didn't have kids themselves, but they were.
So you come from a long line of people who really don't procreate, Dana.
Right, yes, absolutely.
What is that all about?
So I think that it was that we come from a long line of people who did nothing else. And people decided, like, when it was discovered that it wasn't essential, people made other choices. So but there was, and it seems like there are a lot of people around who are providing these. I'm a fabulous stand-in parent. I'm a great parent by proxy once they're 18. So again, when people are like, "Do you have any kids?" I say, "I have, 140 a year, and most of them graduate from college. So that's fine. And I don't have to pay the student loans." So again, they didn't have kids of their own. But Uncle Billy, so my brother and I sort of helped look after him when he was getting old after my aunt died. And he was sort of starting to get what we would now call dementia, which we then called just losing it. And he lived alone in an apartment. And we would go over, and he would come over to my house once a week for a big dinner, because I continued, even in a small New York apartment, continue to have everybody over on Sundays. And for my birthday once, I think I was still in my 20s, Uncle Bill, at one point he would forget where he lived. He would take like 2 subways to get to my house. And at one point it was like, write down what subways I have to take. And I said, "Okay, Uncle Bill, you want me to write down your address so that you actually have your address?" We said, "Write down my address, but give me a better building." Said, "Write down an apartment in a better building." And I thought that was a great answer. It's like, yeah, give me an address, but have them take me to it. If I forget where I live, have them take me to a nicer apartment. I thought, yeah. So he came over and he said, "I have everything that every woman wants for her birthday." So this scared, because I was like, I don't know what he thinks every woman wants for her birthday. I'm like, I get 28. I'm like, okay. And actually, she got me what every graduate student in New York City in an apartment on the Lower East Side wanted. He got me a bag of tokens for the subway. He got me 2 sheets of stamps, because remember we used to use the mail. I was putting stuff, sending out articles and doing stuff all the time. 2 sheets of stamps and a bottle of Fennel number 5.
Oh, wow. That's better than Gina Barreca.
It was better. But I thought, the enormously practical things that saved me waiting online for hours to get tokens and stamps. And then something that I couldn't afford that was very classy, as we would say in my neighborhood, and entirely frivolous. And it was...
I would have taken you as someone who jumped the turnstile that somebody could use the tokens.
No, I actually was brought up to be, and it's a project, it's a little, I don't know whether I've actually abandoned it, but I was brought up to be a very good girl. That's like got a whole idea of, romance and all the rest of it. It was so, it had such a stranglehold on my imagination. And, I was the first girl in my family, woman in my family to graduate from high school, to go to college. And when I told my mother died when I was a teenager, she was French Canadian. So that was a whole other talk about different ways of making food. When I told my aunts in that Brooklyn kitchen, because of course we had the 2 kitchens, we had the upstairs kitchen that no one ever cooked in, because immaculate, beautiful, fully appliance, gorgeous. Well, we didn't know anybody fancy enough to be cooked for in that kitchen. It was actually the people who'd be allowed to sit in the living room. No one could go into, where there was still cellophane on the lampshades, because no one ever turned the light on. They had to keep the lampshades nice. But there was the basement kitchen that was like an opera. That's where the culinary choreography came from. And so I'm going to tell my Aunt Rose, who had been stirring the meat sauce for since 1947. It had been on the back burner because you had to have hot food 24/7, because somebody could get paroled. And I went to tell her, I said, "Hey, I'm going to go to college." And she paused in the stirring of the sauce. And it was like the Earth's axis tilted slightly. And she said, "You're going to go to college in New Hampshire?" And I said, "Yeah, I got scholarship, I got work study, I got student loans. We'll be okay, but you worry about the money." She said, "You go to college in New Hampshire." I said, "You're pregnant, right?" I said, "No, I got it. I'm good at school. I got this." And she said, "Happened to your cousin. You can always come home." So, it was still everything important that happens over somebody making food. It was still the idea of and so I went to college thinking, okay, I got 9 months before anybody expects me back. and I still have a little bit. So that's where I sort of learned to go against everything I had been taught, because that was not within the range of experience that anybody has.
Oh,
Like a woman with a professional life was not.
yeah.
Yeah.
Gina, how did you respond to Dave Ferry's comment about you when he said you are, and I quote, very, very funny for a woman?
That was one of the nicest things anybody could have found me. First of all, Dave Barry is hilarious. I've been lucky enough to meet him a few times. So he was very he's very good friends with Jude Martin. So I got to know him at the Rock Bottom Remainders at the Miami Book Fair. And so for Barry to say that, and it's such a quintessential Dave Barry line.
Yeah,
that statement, and then the statement that undercuts it. And it's also like a perfect example of the difference between what I think of as conventional male humor and women's humor. Because I, again, grew up in this patriarchal, very conventional family, neighborhood, and God forbid, as we would say, God forbid somebody should give you a compliment and then not take it back the minute that they gave it to you.
Mhm.
Right? So that Uncle Bill in the Decatur School Stories says, I remember him watching these old movies. And Bill was there for one of them, and I seen somebody, I can't, who it was, well, Jack Colbert or somebody would say, I want to see my name up in lights. And so I'm 5 years old or something, and I said, I want to see my name up in lights. And Uncle Bill said, change your name to vacancy. And I had no idea what that meant, because I'm like 5. But when I heard, everybody else laughed. And I thought, all right, getting that last laugh. I mean, that was the first time, because my academic work and a lot of my other books have been about humor as a topic, subject. And I thought, okay, that's it. It's like, it's coming up with what you say after somebody says it. And it was a very early and formative experience for me, even though I didn't understand anything except the dynamic of what was going on. I didn't understand the word, but that's one of the parts of Gina's book. It's like, okay, when did humor really become part of my life? And we were on Ocean Avenue. She said that it was, if you weren't funny, you were, especially as a girl, you weren't going to get a line in.
Right.
Right.
I've always respected women who are funny. I think that there are a lot of people who are allergic to humor, but I think that a funny woman is just as funny as a funny man. Don't you?
Oh, absolutely. And
So,
but I think, yeah.
My follow-up to that is, do men laugh at women's jokes differently than women laugh at men's jokes?
Oh, sweetheart, this is the topic. The first book I did that became a bestseller was called, they used to call me Snow White, but I drift. Women's Strategic Use of Humor. It was published by Viking Penguin. And it actually is an example of how humor is used. So it actually was on the bestseller list for the Globe and Mail National Bestseller List in Canada for something like 38 weeks or something. I got a notice. It's like over half a year, national bestseller list in the top 10. It's like, and I told my father, called him long distance. It was a big deal. I already had a job up there. Called him from Connecticut. And I said, Dad, dear, Snow White's been on the Globe and Mail list for over half a year. And I said, well, honey, it has snow in the time. He said, Canadians are very literal people. It was like he'd waited his whole life to say that one line.
Right.
And I mean, and then he said, congratulations, I'm so proud. Then he said, but it's like he couldn't resist taking a swipe. Again, it's like a cat taking a swipe at, the chipmunk that's running past the door. Just couldn't resist. Just make it a wise part before and then going into the congratulations. So that's exactly what I grew up with. And most women don't do that. I mean, I learned how to do it because it was the formula in my family. And I sometimes have to resist doing it. But what I also realized was that for women, or for any really marginalized group, learning how to use humor effectively is, it could be a weapon, it could be a shield, it could be a way to, again, make your voice heard, because a lot of times humor can be used to make people feel closer together than they could ever feel, or it could be used to shove people apart, right? to make the differences and the divisions as wide as possible. And it depends on circumstance, on tone, ever like what the laugh track of the occasion is like, right?
Yeah.
And for a long time, there's been a script that those in power have held and used against women, which is shut women up, was often the line like, "Oh, what's the matter, honey? Can't you take a joke?" Right? It was the sort of the elbow in the ribs. Oh, women have no sense of humor. Oh, you can't say anything in front of her. She's so sensitive. What are you going to do now? Cry, right? It was all through history. And so I learned over the years how to cope with that. And I believe it's a set of skills. And, so that one of my favorite stories is about the first woman who worked, this carpenter who worked public relations in the White House for Lady Bill Johnson. She was the first woman who was a spokesperson for the White House. And she was a good friend of Ann Richards, Texas, and a couple of loudmouth broads. And so when she retired from the White House and the Johnson administration, she wrote a book called Ruffles and Flourishes about her time in Washington. And so it's some big cocktail party. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., statesman, a writer in his own right, comes up to her and says, "Loved your book, Liz. Who wrote it for you?"
Oh.
And that's one of those just kidding, can't you take a joke? Now, for most women, for girls brought up to be good girls, our responses to that would be like, "I don't understand why you're trying to undermine what I've done. I put so much of myself into this project. Why is the first thing you're trying to..." Your voice goes up so high that only bats can hear you. And it's not a good way, right? But what this carpenter does that gave me a wonderful blueprint, and that I think is still one of the great examples. So when Arthur Schlesinger comes up and says, "Love your book list," and read it for you, she says, "So glad you liked it, Arthur. Who read it to you?" That's just like, okay, if you want to play, we're both going to play. It's not like you make me feel bad and then I blush and get tears in my eyes and go to lawyer. Because a gag, when it's not something to be funny, is a gag that's put across your mouth to shut you up.
Right.
And it's your job to remove that gag and to say what you need to say so that you don't choke on all of those unspoken things. And so when you ask about men reacting to women's laughter and women's reacting to men's laughter, I think it's sort of different now, but a little bit getting better. But still, I tell this to young women and men in my classes, young people in my classes, that girls are still taught when we're encouraged, when we're about 13, to make silver bell tinkling laughter. When there's a guy trying to be funny, so you go, "The girl who makes that noise is not having a good time." When women are really laughing, we're going, "Don't make a big deal in my pants." We're messy. We're spilling things. And actually one of the things I haven't gotten to know, as I've been lucky enough to do so many comic writers, actual comic performers over the years, is that people who work in comedy will never when they're having a good time, they won't laugh, right? I'm sure you know this, right? They sit in the front, they'll be at a front table, or they'll be in the front of an auditorium, and they will sit there. And when I was first starting out, I was horrified. I would know, here's a writer, I admire. She's one of my favorites, Joan Rivers. I Joan Rivers, the fundraiser. And she was looking at me there wasn't a smile across her face. I thought, "Oh my God, I must die." And she got up and she said into the mic, "I hate you, you bitch. You're funnier than I am." It's the greatest compliment in the world. But it was really people who are in comedy don't laugh. They come up and say in a straight face, "That was very funny." That's it. I mean, it is really, that was very funny. And it sounds like they just said, "Your hamster just died." That was very funny. They do not, it's an entirely different professional reaction. So I've learned that that's what you're looking for. You're not looking to make somebody in the business laugh. You're looking for them to really pay attention to what you're doing. And so I really think, but laughing together is such a relief when you know that somebody could get it. And that's another thing with, again, having relationships that depend on text. And, you can send people funny videos, but it's different from being next to somebody. It's like you want to go to a scary movie and a funny movie where there's and with somebody that you can nudge, that you can get scared together and laugh together, because those are like physiologically bonding experiences.
God,
To
yeah.
fear together and to feel delight together, actually in person with people, or through where you can at least see people's faces. That there's an intimacy, there's a connection between people that I fear that we're not encouraging enough in for the young people in our world. And I would hate for that to be something, when you can't take it with you. I would hate for that to be what was able to make it important to have a legacy of all.
What first drew you to study humor through a feminist lens?
I realized that the two things that compelled me to read anybody's books were anger, and that those were the writers I loved. It was Dickens, Thackeray. It was usual canonical authors that I cut my teeth on. But then I started to realize that, let's say, George Eliot or Jane Austen or Spark or Fay Weldon were writers whose humor was very different from their male counterparts. And I thought, if I'm going to actually finish a PhD, if I'm going to finish a dissertation, I better be writing about something I'm interested in.
Yeah.
And when I first went to my advisors, who turned out to be wonderful, and they said, nice guy, said, don't you think if there was a difference in the literary uses of humor between women writers and men writers, somebody else would have discovered it? And I said, obviously not. There were like 2 books that had been out there for years. It was really an unmapped landscape. Didn't mean the landscape wasn't there. It's just nobody had done the topographical map of it yet. And I'm like, I got this surveyor's equipment here. I want to do this. And since then, gender and humor has become very much, but that was almost 40 years ago. And so it's been great to work on that. And I didn't think it was what I was going to do for the rest of my natural life. But it was really because I wanted there to be something that I knew could keep up my interest in something. If I had done something like, the use of, which could have been interesting, like the use of embroidery in women's novels between 1810 and 1860, I wouldn't have had as much fun writing 312 pages as I did looking at subversion and humor and treachery and territory, and the cryptic encoding of women's humor was very different than the more obvious uses of it in male authors. And that's entertained me until today.
Gina, I want you to break down a little bit of how I feel when I open up my social media in the morning. And I want you to tell me if you think I'm a dirty dog or whether I'm just a guy or whatever, because you've been studying the genders for a long time. But when I open up Instagram and I see all these influencers who are 20-something girls wearing very, very provocative clothing, just showing their body, not influencing me in any particular way, why am I both angry and jealous when I look at the young women of today who call themselves influencers?
What an interesting question. I mean, I think that I like the end pieces there. I mean, certainly, I think feminism is different because it's still the idea. I assume everybody I meet is a feminist, male and female. I mean, I assume, that you're using cutlery, like you can make conversation. You believe that women should be able to vote. Like you believe that women are human beings. That's my definition of feminism.
And they don't swear. So
It's
yes.
not, yeah, don't slip, right? It's not a club that's really hard to get into. You can wear earrings, you can wear makeup, you don't have to veil yourself. It's not about repressing anything. It's about being able to make choices and decisions. So what I worry about, or emphasis on the body and the eclipsing of other parts of the sex, is that at some point, everybody, male, female, everybody in between, we are going to have, we're going to pass the point where we're the unfamiliar. And if your entire sense of self is based on being the unfamiliar, same with men, when you can be the bright, shiny thing, it's like at some point, you are then going to be replaced by the new bright, shiny thing. If you don't have backup, you don't have something else that you love, you don't have something else that you can engage with, you don't have something else that speaks to you besides how you look from the back. Somebody has to like, what you have to say or think. So it's not, getting a reaction is different from having an influence. And so I think that, do you want somebody just to react? I mean, it's easy to arouse somebody. It's harder to get them interested. And so, right? So that, and it doesn't mean you can't do both, but it's nice if they could be a combination. And if that arousal could be, again, intellectual, emotional, psychological, as well as just physical. And so that you get a whole package. And somebody who's just out there going, look at these is different from saying somebody who says, want to talk about this? Let's figure out what's going on. And what do you think of it?
Why do corporations, though, invest money into influencers who have a great set of tatas instead of somebody who has something really important and deep to talk about?
I guess they people flip more quickly through the tatas. I mean, really, I think it's interesting to see how this works. But again, if we're looking for the respective corporations, where those two words don't go together, the funding from corporations is different. But Dorothy Parker said, if you want to know what God thinks about money, just look at those to whom He's given it. It's really not as static. But yeah, it's going to be hard, I think, again, looking back at later for people to assess what we were thinking then. But we look back at commercials now, where it was 4 out of 5 doctors recommend Parliaments for their cigarettes. You look back and go, really? 4 out of 5 doctors smoke Parliaments? That's where we're going for these ads. So it's like this woman who's got this shape recommends going to Aruba or something. It's like, I could talk about going to Aruba. It's sort of it's a different, money doesn't care who spends it, right? So it's sort of like they just want people to forget about what kind of cash they're getting about the world because they're looking at something.
Gina, a moment ago, you mentioned the word God, and that brings up the question, is the supreme being a boy or a girl?
Oh, I think God is definitely a man, because no female deity would have come up with the first rule of the Garden of Eden being a menu that you have to follow. It's a diet. The first thing in the Garden of Eden is God saying, don't eat the apple. A female God would have said, apples, they're savory, they're sweet, they have fiber, they're nourishing, they're beautiful. You make it into a pie. You cut it up the apple with some cheese. It helps the teeth. It gets the schmutz out of your teeth. A female God would not have said, don't eat this. I find that a very easy question. Also, there wouldn't be as messy as it is. The universe would not be as messy. It would be kinder. It would be nicer. There are anomalies. There's, Mary Queen of Scots. There's follow necessarily. But yeah, first thing that God does is don't eat this, male God.
Which one idea you're exploring now that feels risky but very exciting?
Oh, what I'm going to do next. I mean, I'm thinking about, what's the song I haven't heard yet. I'm trying to decide how much longer I want to teach. I teach. None of my students are permitted to use any kind of electronic device in my class. They have to actually buy books. They can buy them for $3 on eBay. It's not that I require them to buy certain editions, but they actually have to have a physical copy of the book. They can only write in their notebooks. They cannot have iPhones. They cannot have laptops. If they have an ankle bracelet, I have to get a note from their parole officer. If they have, pacemakers, they have to turn them on. There is nothing electronic in my classroom. And they're 2.5-hour classes. And so some of these kids are jonesing after an hour of not having a device. They've never not had a device for 90 minutes. And it's 40 kids in a class. And 36 of them end up staying. 4 of them really decide they can't get it. And I don't negotiate. But the other ones are mesmerized, they really like it. So I get a lot out of it, but I don't, coming from Brooklyn, New York, I do not turn my back on the crowd. So I don't use the blackboard. I don't use the whiteboard. I don't use slides. I don't use electronic devices. We talk for 2.5 hours.
So how do you assess someone's ability to understand, absorb, and learn?
They write. So they write for the first 15 minutes. I put out quizzes, discussion questions. So that means I also know that I can call on all of them. One of my party tricks is I can learn everybody's name immediately. So by the second week, I actually know who they are. I can do that per semester. And then I call them dear. but they've just written for 20 minutes on a particular topic. So I will then open with that topic and know that they have something to say about it. And it's open book and open notebook. So they refer back to the text, but they have to quote directly from the text. And most of the time, they're really interesting conversations because I am what I think are questions about whether a character is it luck or is it destiny? Do they believe in luck or destiny? Does a character believe in luck or destiny? What are the lines that indicate that? What are the moments of irreverence? When could somebody have made a different decision? What are the funny parts? What is funny? What isn't funny? What's tragic? Why do comic novels have breaks of tragedy? Because they always do. It's not only a comic moment in a tragic novel, there are tragic moments. But at some point, I'm not going to be able to do all of that without notes and as effectively as I do it. And I think it's becoming gruesome and difficult because they have to, all of their writing is in blue books. Their finals and midterms. Everything I grade is based on their ability to discuss ideas in class. I give them the notes.
It sounds like that's a great way to kind of battle the growing existence of AI, and not allowing students to go back home and just sit down with Copilot or Claude and get an A from Gina as their grade. This way they have to do it in-house in front of you, right?
Absolutely. And that's why it's so that if somebody, for example, doesn't actually read the book, but comes in the first play, I've been doing this a long time, so they'll come in through the first class and say, well, I believe that the opening to do a class on horror and movies. So the opening to the second half of The Shining is a montage of it. They're trying to remember what they read. So it's a montage of earlier. I'll say, okay, Benji, when you use montage, it's interesting borrowing from a sort of film tradition of this. And so what makes you use montage? Why you choose that? How are you using montage? And you see everybody in the class, like montage. I'm using it like a montage. I said, okay, well, what definition of montage? Give me the examples from the novel. And Benji is clearly has no idea what he's talking about. He's not going to do that again. You know what? It's like the class sets the pace. So the other students who are reading and will go on page 174, you've got it. And on page 76, and it happens even before that, because then on 279, when his wife comes in, and the privilege, everybody has to talk, but the privilege to talk is you have the line in front of you. So they know these books backwards and forwards. And it's fun. But at some point, I'm going to stop doing it. And I'm going to stop doing it before everybody realizes. I think of actually Gina School. I'll just come back to that for a minute. Gina School is the anti-AI. Right. This is a book that could not have been done by AI.
Yeah.
Two very flawed, very real human beings putting together our imaginations. And AI cannot, it's fascinating. I've only started to really understand what it can do recently. And I'm bald, but it is fascinating. But I also realized that what AI can do, I teach Frankenstein, sort of, and what AI can do is put together dead flesh. It takes pieces from the past and can reassemble so that it seems like something is new because these pieces of what's dead have never been put together this way before. But it's different from birth. It is the creation of something new, but it's not alive. It is an abomination. It is sewn together in no intelligent, vital, going back to the real idea of vital, living way. So it is a resurrection of pieces that are brought together, but it's not created. I'm sure there are brilliant ways of using it, and I believe that in certain arenas, certainly it will change how things work. I think in terms of creativity, it's not going to be able to do it. It can do a villain but it can't do that.
Right. Gina, if you were a professor or the writer that you are, what alternate life would you imagine for yourself?
Oh, I'd be in a basement kitchen somewhere cooking for 150 people.
All right. Just what I wanted to hear.
I got astonishingly lucky, and I've worked my tail off, but in finding something, when I was in college, I had no idea what I was going to do. I was not the kid that you would have pointed to and said, oh, this one's going to be a professor. That was not destiny. I could never have been a nurse. I could never have been a server. I could never have been something where I could have harmed someone if I was, all kinds of pressure was put on me. I probably could have worked a certain kind of retail. I used to work retail in the summers, but I really decided, and not in a big philosophical way, but that I really liked working not so that somebody in a corporate structure could buy a bigger book.
Yeah.
I like the idea of the privilege of teaching, the privilege of being able to be in a conversation and in a world of ideas where you get to talk about what matters, as you do.
Right.
But we get to talk about things that matter in a way that will get us involved in the larger conversations that have been going on for 10,000 years.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Gina, I hope you had a good time today on 50 Tastes of Gray.
I loved this conversation.
Gina, say aloha to everybody who's watching you right now.
Aloha, everybody, on 50 Tastes of Gray.
Fantastic.